Um, it's good to see you here. I'm Jane Vossler, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center to the first program of the season and also the first Travelogue of the season. And I'm very happy that we have Jorge Garcia, PhD, Research Assistant Professor of Anthropology at UVM. He specializes in some topics that I didn't even know really exist. Specializes in bioarchaeology, historical ecology, cultural resources management. So he grew up in Colombia and has done extensive archaeological research in his own country. So welcome, Jorge, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane, for the introduction. So hello, everyone. I'm Jorge Garcia. As Jane mentioned, I'm a faculty member with the Department of Anthropology at UVM. And I also am a researcher for the Consulting Archaeology program here, which is a program that focuses on consultation with the private sector, the federal government, as well as the state, in terms of preserving the cultural resources in the state of Vermont. So I have been working as an archaeologist for over 20 years. I've been working in archaeological sites here, of course, in the United States, also in Belize for multiple years in incredible Maya sites. I also worked in Ecuador for some time and Mexico. But my focus is Colombia. That's where I grew up, and it's a very interesting location to see the archaeology there and see these past societies and how they established themselves and adapted to the multi-environmental place like Colombia is. So that's going to be our focus today. I'm going to talk about some of the most important sites in the country and how you can visit some of these sites if you're interested. There's also the option to doing virtual tours to some of these sites and also museums. So you can do that in the comfort of your homes as well, and not necessarily go to Colombia to experience some of these cultural resources that we have. So many of the places that I'm going to be talking to you today, were really difficult to reach at some point, just because, as you probably know, Colombia has been under a war for decades, and this war is based first on political adversaries, right? So you have kind of liberals and conservative political parties kind of fighting, and eventually that led to some the organization of guerrillas within the country. You probably have heard about the FARC, of ELN, or the M19, which are socialist or communist guerrillas that were trying to change certain aspects of the political arenas in the country. And then in addition to that, you also have big drug trafficking organizations. Obviously, Colombia is the largest producer of cocaine in the world. And this obviously has caused incredible conflict within the country. More recently, we see a change on this because there's more peace deals. The FARC, for example, disbanded, or well, I should say some factions of the FARC disbanded. Some of them are still active. And then we also had paramilitary organizations that were kind of these counter-guerrilla armed groups that were very violent, displaced. Colombia has one of the largest displacement of people in the world. I think it's second to Afghanistan. So again, that created a lot of restrictions for traveling within the country. So as a Colombian, you were able to travel a little bit more to some of these locations that we're going to talk about today. But as foreigners in the past, in the last 10 years, reaching these locations was not possible until now. So now it is a great opportunity to visit Colombia. There's a lot of safety place for tourism. We want tourism in the country. The government is really pushing for for Colombia to be a destination for travelers to go to and experience some of these beautiful environments that we have, of course, in there. So over here, I just have kind of this travel advisory warning. We always been in this list by the Department of State that warns travelers to go to certain locations. As you can see now, we only have two areas, which is the Cauca and Santander, which are considered to be areas restricted for tourism, particularly for American visitors. But in this list, in the past, it even was the capital, Bogota, was listed in there for a long time. So the entire country was on this kind of travel warning. And again, even though we're still listed now, that has changed dramatically because obviously the areas that are restricted now are less. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting any pictures up here.
We're just seeing the travel advisory.
Yeah. Okay. He hasn't started anything else yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you shown any others, Jorge?
No, I'm trying to navigate this. Okay, here we go. So again, even with this travel advisory, prior to the pandemic, so we're talking about 2019, Colombia became a really hot spot for tourism. We have about 4.5 million visitors that year in 2019. And even after the recovery of some of the global health crisis, again, we're not out on the pandemic yet, as some people point out, but the tourism is bouncing back, right? Right now we have expecting about 3.4 million tourists this year in 2022. So tourism is very important in Colombia. It generates over 500,000 jobs in the country. And there's a lot of emphasis on what we call responsible tourism, in which, it makes a positive impact, not only into the population, but also the natural resources there, because these areas begin to be protected. And again, being wanted to be a center of ecotourism, a lot of the natural environments are being now protected by the government and other organizations. So it is this that allows also to establish what we call cultural heritage management, in which the cultural resources of the country, right, those past societies and contemporary groups and their traditions are being also protected in a way to maintain this track of tourism in the country. And that's going to be one of our topics today. And in here, this is just kind of the travel advisory for Colombia and destinations. So in this link that I provided here, you can find a lot of information about traveling in Colombia. What are some of the most important destinations for visitors there, and just get a general idea and general information of traveling around in the country. So I just wanted to have that for you there in case you want to go in and look at some of this information that is very relevant if you're thinking about going there. So in terms of touristic destinations, there are multiple locations that are well known as important centers of tourism. We have, for example, up here, the city of Cartagena, which was the first city in the country. It's this colonial city that's on the Caribbean coast, on the North Coast. As you can see in this image, you have these walls that were constructed by the Spanish to protect the city from pirates. Because what happened there is, because it's a big port, the Spanish will send all the gold, all the silver to Cartagena and put it in boats there and transport those materials to Spain from there, because it was very fortified. The pirates could not get in. They had balustrades in the ocean that prevented boats to coming into the bay without permission. They had like these giant chains that they will pull and did not allow certain boats didn't want to have access to those areas. So very important colonial city, and is probably the biggest touristic destination in the country by foreigners as well as locals there too. We also have the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this. Basically, it's an incredible location because it's the only snow-capped mountain that reaches about 5,000 meters or about 11,000 feet of elevation in the tropics. So it's the only kind of elevation system that you're going to find in that specific belt in the tropics. So you have multiple environments there. You have sea level environment, coastal environments, all the way to snow-capped mountain, going through Paramo, cloud forest. You have mild elevations that are more open savannas, and all the way to the ocean. So in a day, you can be at the beach or you can be in the snow-capped mountain. And then, again, this is the only place in the world that you are allowed to do that. And that generates incredible biodiversity there as well. Another area that is also well known for travelers are going to be the coffee growing regions. As you probably know, Colombian coffee is considered one of the best in the world. There's a lot of coffee plantations in the country because, again, in the Andes, when you reach kind of that middle elevation there, that's perfect for growing coffee. It has like the required soils as well as the required weather, the required rain that you need to create, that you need to grow coffee. So again, this coffee region, this is actually Quindío, and you also probably have heard about the city of Medellin, where you can have kind of this tourism or traveling associated to coffee and associated to the beauty of these types of environments. In more recent years, even the capital, Bogota, has become a center for tourism too. You have incredible varieties of foods there. You have this colonial architecture there that is very prominent, as you can see in this video. That's the main plaza in Bogota. And in addition to this, you have incredible museums. Two of them are very, very important. One of them is going to be the Gold Museum. Pre-Columbian societies in Colombia produce a huge amount of gold artifacts that were very elaborate, considered some of the best technologies of metallurgy in the world in this area. Some of them they call the lost techniques, the lost wax techniques, because we don't really know at this point how they were making some of these beautiful artifacts out of gold, silver, and other metals as well. So the Gold Museum, it's definitely a destination that you want to go to if you're in the city of Bogota. You cannot miss the Gold Museum. It's wonderful. And the other museum that is really important is called the Botero Museum. I don't know if you're familiar with Fernando Botero, but Fernando Botero is this painter. He's considered the last master painter alive at this moment. He kind of paints this, larger bodies, larger sculptures representing different things. But he also had a collection of his private paintings that he donated to the country. So we have, Monet, you have Cézanne, you have Van Goghs, you have Picassos in that museum. So again, really, really incredible museum to visit as well if you're traveling in Bogota. So again, Bogota is becoming this very important destination for tourism. The other thing that Bogota is known for, again, the capital, is because of the cycling routes. So basically, the whole city has very good access for bicycles. You can go to bicycles everywhere. Usually on Sundays, they will close the entire city, and cars cannot go on the streets in the majority of roads, and they close them just for people to ride their bicycles, bring their families, have some food, do exercise. And that has become very prominent in there. We are big cycling fans, right? And some of the last winners of the Tour de France, the Giro of Italy, are Colombian cyclists, because again, it's a very important part of the culture there as well. So, why is Colombia becoming this important center for tourism? And yes, Encanto, the Disney movie, has been really useful for that. But it's because of the biodiversity and and the cultural diversity within the country, past and present. So there are multiple environments, and their current conservation in Colombia is becoming very important because it allows people to travel to these destinations in a way to foment ecotourism. So Colombia is considered the second most biodiverse place in the world, only second to Brazil. And if you look at actually at square feet, Colombia it is the most biodiverse place in the world. You have thousands and thousands of species, about 56,000 species inhabit Colombia. A lot of them are endemic species, meaning that they don't occur anywhere else in the world. And we're talking about almost 500 species that are endemic to the country, one of the countries with the most flowering plants in the world, and the country with most diversity of birds in the entire world as well. So again, this biodiversity is really important for tourism and the conservation of these natural environments as well. So in order for us to kind of understand why Colombia is such a hotspot for tourism, we need to look at the geography of Colombia and look at what are some of these locations and why it's becoming such, again, a hotspot for that. So in the north over here, we have a very desertic environment. This is kind of the farthermost north point in the country. It's called La Guajira, which we share also with Venezuela. And you can see in this satellite imagery how dry that location is. This location has been inhabited by indigenous societies for centuries called there are Arawak speakers called the Wayu, and the Wayu are very resilient. They're very strong indigenous communities there. They're actually some of the only indigenous communities that survived the conquest in Colombia, and they continue to have this authority and this power over those regions. Even though it is a very poor region, there's a lot of lack of water in the area, but the environment is so beautiful. It's a little bit hard to get there. You have to really go to their capital, which is around here, called the city of Riohacha. And from Riohacha, you can schedule a tour to those other locations. One of them is going to be called Cabo de la Vela, which is this beautiful environment. You have these sand dunes right next to the sea, and it's just an incredible location to visit. There are some archaeological sites there, particularly known as shell mounds, where populations of indigenous societies will go there and consume large amounts of shellfish, and they create kind of these mounds with the remnants of the shells that they discard, and they create kind of this very preserved, pristine archaeological sites in there. A little bit further down, and this is that Snow Peak Mountain that I was telling you about. And again, as you see in this image, it's an independent mountain, right? It's not connected to the Andes in here in any way. So it's kind of this very pristine, very intact location. And you can have those multiple elevations create an incredible biodiversity there. A lot of endemic species live there, as well as indigenous communities in the past and the present. So this area was in the past inhabited by a chiefdom society that we'll talk about today called the Tairona. And the Tairona created monumentality. This is what we call Ciudad Perdida, or the lost city, because it's a city in the middle of nowhere, an indigenous city. You have to hike. You can actually visit that city, but it's a very difficult hike. You have to be in good shape to go there. It takes about 4 to 5 days to reach that destination, and you have to carry your food, you have to carry your water, and you have to get permission by the indigenous societies that live there, that are called now the Kogi as well. We also have areas, and again, as I mentioned before, this is all in the Atlantic coast, but a little bit further down, after the frontier with Panama, and Panama used to be part of Colombia until it got their own independence. We have the Pacific coast, so we have the Atlantic coast and we have the Pacific coast as well. And this area, it's a very tropical forest environments. It's one of the wettest places in the world. It has some of the highest precipitation a year. It basically rains there every day, and there's a lot of humidity. But again, that also creates a lot of biodiversity there. One of the big touristic attractions there, to call it that, is going to see the whales. And the whales, blue whales and humpback whales, will go there and give birth to their calves, and people can go see that. And again, that's a very important aspect of this destination. Here, as you can see, we have the Andes, but the Andes in other locations, like for example in Ecuador, and further down in Peru, all the way to Chile and Argentina, it's kind of this single mountain range. In Colombia, the Andes are a little bit different because they basically split in three parts, as you can see in the map. So you have the Eastern Cordillera, the Central Cordillera, and the Western Cordillera. So in the Western Cordillera, kind of this area here, this mountain range here, you have within valleys, you have the city of Cali, which is again another well-known destination for travelers. It's an area that you produce a lot of sugar cane. It's as you can see in this image here, there's farms and farms and farms for monocropping. But also it's well known for salsa dancing. Some of the best salsa dancers in the world come from Cali, and some of the best bands that play salsa, which is kind of getting a lot of attention nowadays, are from there. And of course, the Pacific culture, the Pacific environments have a lot of impact into the culture in Cali. Over here in the Eastern Cordillera, you have the city of Bogota, which is the capital. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Bogota when we talk about some of the chiefdom societies there. But again, very big destination for tourism right now. A little bit to the east of the country, we have the plains, right? So these are lowland environments. And in this area, they're dominated by the Orinoco River, which is this river here that separates Venezuela and Colombia, and creates savanna environments, open environments that are nevertheless very diverse. That's where anacondas will live and capybaras will live. But it has been used for the cattle industry, right? You have these big grasslands that ranchers bring their cows and their cattle, and it's the location where you're going to produce that type of industry. And here further south, and probably occupying most of the country, it's going to be the Amazon basin, right? So this is the Amazon forest over here, all this area, which has limits with Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador. All right. So the Amazon will have frontiers with all these countries. And again, incredible area. There's a lot of archaeological discoveries that are taking place right now, because as the forest gets destroyed or burned in some of these areas, there's a lot of fires. They're planting a lot of soy. They're also having cattle being produced those areas. Those forests disappear, and that actually it's in a way creates open spaces that you can see the archaeology. You can see the remnant of these sites within those locations. So here, for example, we have these huge constructions, geomorphology here that is showing modifications by prehistoric groups in the area. And remember that the Amazon used to be considered this area that was limited for human occupations, that humans could not survive or big populations could not survive in those areas because you cannot produce crops because the soils were very acidic. But this is not necessarily the case. We're seeing that humans are actually modifying these environments, completely changing those environments, producing what they call terra pretas, or dark soils that they actually modify these acidic soils. They bring in, for example, a lot of fish residue. Kind of, they eat a lot of fish and they discard the bones. Fish has a lot of phosphorus. They kind of modify those soils so they become extremely fertile locations, and you can actually have big agriculture, big areas of agriculture in those areas that can support a population there. So now we used to have very low estimates of how many people lived in the Amazon forest prior to the conquest, but now we're talking about huge populations, going over 20 million people are considered to have lived in areas in the Amazon right before the European conquest of the country. After that, obviously, the populations got decimated by warfare, by disease, by the Spanish incursions. But again, we have now better estimates of what the population was doing there and how they were modifying these soils. This image right here, it's actually one of the most recent discoveries that occurred in the Colombian Amazon in the area of Caquetá. And it's just this incredible rock art system that they have there. And it expands over 2 kilometers. So you have this rock shelter covered in these beautiful artistic representations of the animals, of some practices they did, these geometric shapes. And this has been discovered within the last 3 years. And now it's becoming a very hot spot for tourism too. Unfortunately, a lot of this is creating problems there because a lot of people are destroying the artifacts there. They're kind of taking away some of these pieces of stone. They carve them and take them, or they scratch on them and they are destroying them. So again, we have to be very careful when we visit the sites to try to be respectful and maintain those pristine things. So let's begin talking about some of these archaeological sites that you will be able to visit physically or virtually in Colombia that are really important. And I kind of divided this in terms of human occupations and a time frame, starting with the first human groups that travel or that moved into this territory that we call now Colombia. And these are considered what we call Paleo-Indian, the Paleo-Indian period. And the earliest evidence for humans in Colombia, they date to about 12,000 years ago, when the first humans began to occupy these areas. And these areas have not been well researched. A lot of the areas where we have Paleo-Indian occupations are, again, in these problematic areas that have violence, and they have armed conflicts in those locations. So the most known areas for Paleo-Indian occupations are close to the city, are close to Bogota, because those are the areas that they have done research at. Not everywhere in the country. All other places also have Paleo-Indian sites, but the most known, again, are going to be these ones because they have been researched a little bit better than others. So we're talking about this area here in Colombia, in the Eastern Cordillera. And they include the sites of Tibito, Fuquene, and El Abra. I worked there for my master's research. I did a lot of analysis of some of the tools that they use, and they don't have big archaeological monumental constructions or anything like that. The majority of evidence is going to come in the form of this stone tool technology at the time. And we're going to see that the majority of these groups were following this megafauna, these big animals, mammoth, giant sloths, anything like that. And they needed kind of these big weapons to kill those. But what is interesting here is that not all the human groups were hunting megafauna. Other groups were specializing in other types of subsistence strategies. So they were, for example, hunting smaller mammals like guinea pigs or deer. And you begin to see kind of this interaction with some of these species that becomes really important in the future because that leads to domestication. For example, this interaction with guinea pigs, hunting them at this early stage, eventually guinea pigs were domesticated independently in Colombia. And guinea pigs, of course, they were not for pets as we use them today, but they were being used as a food source, as a protein source. Again, but over here, you can travel really easily to this location. Being very close to Bogota, you can take a taxi there. It's just going to take you like half an hour, 45 minutes to get to some of these locations in those rocks. The majority are located in these rock shelter environments in the Andes. So you have these rock shelter locations that have been modified in many ways and used by humans for many centuries. And there are very incredible sights to see, and the natural environment is beautiful. But again, you're not going to find actual structures or actual things in there that are related to archaeology. You're just going to look at how maybe these populations lived in that area. Nevertheless, it will be a very nice area to visit. After the Paleo-Indian period, and we're talking about 8,000 to about 4,000 years ago, we have what we call the Archaic period. And during the Archaic period, we have a change in technology. We don't have those big stone tools made anymore. Tools become much smaller. You also have the addition of grinding stones, as you see in here, for processing plants. So the consumption of plants becomes more and more important as we go around. Megafauna becomes extinct, right? You don't have the mammoths anymore that you can hunt. So you have to look for new strategies to survive in some of these environments. So populations adapted to some of these changes. We're also talking about some important climatic changes. It becomes much drier, warmer environments than before during the Paleo-Indian. So again, these populations begin to experiment with other things. They begin to experiment, for example, with gardens. They begin horticulture. They begin also producing new tools, including ceramics. You begin to see pottery. And some of the first pottery in the Americas, in the New World, it's found in Colombia. We're going to talk a little bit about those sites. And you also begin to see more complex social organizations, right? You don't have these travelers, these hunters and gatherers that are moving from place to place, but you begin to see more sedentary societies that are staying in those locations for a longer period of time. And some of those individuals become specialists. They begin to specialize in a specific labor, right? Some of them begin to be potters. They just produce pottery. Some of them are hunters. Some of them are gatherers. Some of them are going to be doing the stone grinding. So again, you begin to see a specialization of labor, and that's a big change from the Paleo-Indian period. So one of the most important archaic sites in Colombia, it's called San Jacinto. It's also in the Caribbean coast in the north. And this site becomes really, really important because it's considered to have the first pottery, first ceramics in the New World. It dates to about 6,000 years ago. And it's using a technology that is called fiber tempered ceramics. And fiber tempered ceramics are basically the ceramics that they cover baskets with clay and then they fire that. And that creates this temper that's going to make the ceramic a little bit stronger, but not strong enough, for example, to resist high temperatures. They're very porous, so they're not really useful for cooking. They're not really useful for storing liquids for a long period of time. At this point, they were used for ceremonial, for more ritualistic practices, and also the consumption of fermented drinks. So what the populations are doing here they are not completely sedentary. There's no staying there for all their time. They're moving, but they're using these camps seasonally. So whenever you have the wet season or the rainy season, they were going to the higher elevations. When the dry season comes in, they come back to these locations, which are these open environments, open savannas right next to the river, and they begin to exploit the natural resources there. So a lot of consumption of, for example, snails, you see there, a lot of consumption of riverine species, you see the consumption of turtles, of alligators, of these species that are related to the river. So in here, as you can see, this was a huge excavation. It's about 5 to 8 meters deep and over 30 meters long. And these things that you see here are what we call clay ovens. So what the people are doing here, they're kind of making these holes in the ground. They're putting what we call fire stones or stones that are heated for producing heat and cooking. And what you see here is these ovens did not happen at the same time. People were coming back to these locations, making a new oven, leaving, coming back, creating a new oven, and using those environments, those locations as seasonal camps in this flooded savanna. So again, kind of this during the dry season, people will collect the snails. They also go there when they have like these climatic changes occurring that is forcing the human populations again to use or to adapt to these new types of environments. So the riverine resources are extremely important here. The consumption of fermented drinks, as you can see, this is a pot that was used for the consumption of perhaps fermented grains or fermented grasses that are at that point still very wild plants, but they begin to manage them, to manipulate them, and eventually leading to domestication of some of these species. So this site is very important because we see a precursor to agriculture, a precursor to more developed ceramics. I've been working in these sites for many years, on and off. We're still working in some of the projects there. So we were working, for example, doing lithic analysis, trying to understand what were some of the technologies they were using to produce stone tools. We're also doing dietary analysis, looking at human bone or also animal bone to see what these species are eating. You can determine what a human was eating in the past by analyzing the composition of elements, or particularly the isotopes in their bones. And you can also determine changes in weather patterns and what we call paleoclimate. So you can create paleoclimate reconstructions to try to understand how the climate was at the time there. So the other important aspect of this site is that it has the only community archaeology museum in the country, which is a very, very interesting story about resilience. The local populations there in San Jacinto were subjected to a very violent period. Basically, paramilitary groups come into those areas and they attack the population. There was a massacre in town, so a lot of the population took off, right? There was a lot of displacement from people there. And they valued very much their cultural resources. So they were kind of collecting this. They had a small museum prior to the armed conflict. And after the population got out of there, everybody thought that those artifacts had been lost forever. But what happened was the population was actually the local communities were keeping those, safeguarding those. They hide those artifacts. And once they begin to return to their homes in this kind of governmental politics that we're doing, that kind of try to bring those peoples back to their original homes, they brought back some of those artifacts with them, and they created what we call the Community Museum of San Jacinto, which is this incredible museum, and you can see a picture of it over here. They developed the displays, they developed the narratives of what the artifacts meant, how they were protected, what types of cultures inhabited these locations. And that gained a lot of attention. They received a lot of grants, and now they have their beautiful museum there. That it's a very, very good museum to visit. It's really easy to go to San Jacinto. You just can take a bus or public transportation or rent a car and drive. For example, if you are in Cartagena, it just takes you a little bit over an hour to get from Cartagena to San Jacinto. The other thing that San Jacinto is well known for is for their music, their folklore that uses a lot of the indigenous instruments like the drums and particularly the gaitas, which are these flutes, indigenous flutes that are constructed with local bamboo. And they use beeswax to create kind of those enclosed orifices that are useful to produce music, and it's just a beautiful sound. They have two types: one it's a male gaita, and one it's a female gaita, and they both produce very different sounds. Over here, there's a link for you to use. As you can actually do a virtual visit to the museum. So if you're interested in looking at some of those artifacts, looking at some of those traditions and the community museum there, you can go in there and give those a look. All right. The Peñas Rojas, it's actually in the Amazon. So we're moving now to the south of the country. And it is a very important site, very important archaic site in Colombia because it dates back to about 9,000 years ago. And it is important because it has a lot of relevant information on the use of some species, including palm trees. And palm trees are really important for these archaic societies. We often disregard the importance of palms, but palms are very useful. You can basically use the entire plant for different things. You can use the leaves to use as roofing for your houses. You can use the fruits for consumption or to make fermented drinks. You can use even the stems of the tree to eat them. So if you open one of those, you'll have like the heart of the palm that you probably have eaten at some point in your life. That is very good and very nutritious foods. We also see kind of, again, this association to the beginning of horticulture, the beginning of agriculture in later societies, as well as the domestication of important species as the calabash here. And you also have some of the earliest burials, human burials in the country. So a little bit later on, and we're talking about 800 years after Christ, we begin to see a change in social organization. We begin to see a change that we call the formative period. And during the formative period, there's a lot of social complexity rising. You have more advanced political organizations. You have state societies. You have very, very distinct groups that are adapting to these emerging environments and kind of emerging social and natural pressures that are building up in some of these locations. And Colombia, being kind of the entrance to South America, is where you find a lot of the chiefdom societies. And the other reason for that you have kind of this diversity of chiefdoms in all the locations, is that in Colombia, you never have empires rising, right? Like the Inca or the Wari or Tiahuanacu that you see in Bolivia. This never happens in Colombia. Although some people say that some of these chiefdom societies as the Muisca, which is the first one we're going to talk about, were at the verge of becoming these more advanced civilizations, this kind of empires, as you see with the Inca or the Wari or those other, or the Moche, that are kind of these stronger empires or big civilizations that rise in South America. But again, this is one of those the lost city of the Tayrona, which is in that Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which is at the North Post. But chiefdom societies are basically socio-political organizations in which power is exercised by a powerful leader or a powerful elite group. That some of these positions can be inherited in most cases, but also can be achieved, right, by an individual that is a big warrior, a powerful warrior, or an important hunter for that society. So again, there's a lot of diversity between chiefdom societies, and it's hard to place them as a single type of organization because there's variation within chiefdoms and their forming. But for chiefdom societies, redistribution it's one of the main practices, one of the main aspects for those groups to be considered because again, these elite groups need to redistribute what they've been getting as tribute so the population, it's happy and it's maintained under control. But it's about political organization and control of labor and control of those hierarchies. So again, Colombia is known for having some of the most complex chiefdom societies in the world. Some of them even survived the conquest. The majority of them, unfortunately, disappeared with the influence from European incursions into this area and decimated. But we do have a lot of information about these societies, not only from the archaeology, which is really important here, but also the accounts from the Europeans and the cultural continuity. As I mentioned, some of these chiefdoms survived into the present and they're still very much alive and continue to practice some of the traditions that you see in the past, like you see, for example, with the Kogi, who are the descendants of the chiefdoms known as the Tairona here in the north coast of the country. So again, these chiefdoms are very diverse, not only because of the political organizations, but also the type of environments they lived in, right? So you have, again, chiefdoms here in the coastal regions, you have chiefdoms here in the Pacific region, you have chiefdoms here in the Andes, and also chiefdoms in the Amazon forest. So let's just talk a little bit about some of these important chiefdoms and some of the important sites that have become very important travel destinations for tourists at this point. So the first chiefdom that I'm going to talk about is the Muisca, which is one of the most important and talk about chiefdoms in the literature, in archaeology. The Muisca are Chibcha speakers, and Chibcha, is the language. The Chibcha originates actually in Costa Rica, and you have a migration of these groups kind of coming over here in the Tairona and also going down into the Andes. Again, kind of this diaspora of populations moving from those coastal environments all the way to the Andean region. And again, on the way there, they develop important strategies to survive these harsh environments in the Andes. So the Muisca were first widely distributed. They were in different regions, and there were agricultural societies during the earlier periods. No really centralized authority, no really kind of big populations. But eventually, about 800 AD, you begin to see an increase in the consumption and use of corn or maize. And the production of maize was really important because you can sustain larger populations, and populations begin to be bigger. You begin to have huge amounts of people dominating larger areas, creating more advanced social organizations and technologies here. So we have, for example, better ceramics. We're not looking at these fiber tempered ceramics anymore. They're using more shell, they're using sand with the production of ceramics, making those resistant to heat, making them less porous so you can contain and store liquids. And storage becomes really important for these societies because, again, storing surplus allows for bigger populations and kind of safety in terms of famines or any problems that they might encounter. The other thing that the Muisca are known for is their metallurgy. There were incredible goldsmiths there. They created these beautiful, incredible artifacts. Some of them are utilitarian, but a lot of them are associated to ritual. And gold was associated with the sun, the god. The sun is considered a god for them. And the representation of gold is the representation of the sun. So it was the elites, the chief, and their families that were allowed to use gold regalia or gold materials compared to the general population who were not allowed to use gold or have gold. And you see a lot of these in their burials as well. So the other thing that we see here is an increase in monumentality. We begin to see the construction of larger cities. We begin to see the construction of ritual monuments. We begin to see the construction of astronomic representations of the skies in the stones, fertility rituals. And they also have incredible and extensive trade networks. They produce a lot of salt, and some of the areas did not have salt in some of the locations that are farther away from and this is close to the capital. And they were able to trade that salt for products they didn't produce, products from the tropical environments. You even have marine fish being consumed in the Andes from really far away. So these trade networks were very extensive and reached far locations around. So the chiefdoms of the Muisca have a very interesting origin story. And the origin story of the Muisca begins in this lake. This lake is called the Lake Iguaque. You can actually travel to that lake. There's the Iguaque National Park. You will go to the city of the town of Villa de Leyva, which is this beautiful colonial town. And from there, you can take a taxi or you can go in your own car to Iguaque. The walk is a little bit, you have to be in good shape to do the walk because it's uphill. Remember that you're going up the Andes. So we're looking at very high elevations. This is going to be about 4,000 to 5,000 meters above sea level, about 11,000 to 12,000 feet. So again, it's hard to catch your breath up there sometimes. So again, it's not for everybody, but it's a beautiful place to visit. And again, this is where the Muisca origin story comes. And the story goes that from the lake, this serpent emerged, this snake emerged from the lake. It transformed into a woman. Her name is Bachue, and she was already pregnant. Kind of like this divine conception. She gives birth to a son, and they reproduce and they give origin to the Muisca people. So this lake is and the Muisca are still around. And this lake, again, is very sacred for them because their mythology tells that they originated from the lake. The other very important myth about the Muisca is El Dorado. And this is where the El Dorado story comes from. And what happened there is that the chief will, as I mentioned, they had a lot of gold. The chief will cover himself in gold dust, and they will put a bunch of artifacts into a boat. And there's a gold representation by the Muisca right here in this corner called the Balsa Muisca, which is this boat that represents the chief. And they will go into the middle of the lake, and the chief will jump in the water and kind of get that gold dust off him. And that meant that he entered another realm, a sacred realm that was associated with the gods and their deities. And then they threw a bunch of the gold into the water, a lot of these artifacts, as this kind of offering for the gods there. So the Spanish, this story became very well known by other indigenous groups that told the Spanish the story. And the first Spanish conquistadors that went into the Muisca territory were looking for El Dorado. Of metals, also silver, that was produced and thrown into that lake. So this individual that you see in this painting is Conquistador Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada, who begins to follow the trade routes of the Muisca into their territory, eventually conquering them and decimated the majority of the population. And the capital of the Muisca, at that point called Bacata, had this settlement that Gonzalo de Jimenez de Quesada comes in and begins to build the first church and the first houses in this Andean territory and eventually becoming the capital city of Bogota. So again, the Muisca have a lot of impact into Colombian culture, in particularly in these central regions of the Andes, and their stories are still part of the significant traditions of the country. So the manifestation of chiefly power is also visible, as I mentioned before, through their monumentality. They're constructing these new constructions, new uh, areas of worship. For example, this is called El Infiernito, also close to Villa de Leyva. And this is an astronomical observatory. They were able to align these stones so they can predict the solstice, they can predict the equinox. And that's very important because your agricultural production is timed based on those changes in the sun rays. So again, they begin to construct this beautiful monumental architecture there, also associated with burials. You have a lot of tombs here. This one is one that is really easy to visit. You're gonna go from Bogota to the town of Villa de Leyva. That is about 2 hours from the capital, and from Villa de Leyva, it takes about 10 minutes to 20 minutes to go to some of these sites. The other interesting monuments in this site called El Infiernito, which means little hell, because the Spanish thought that people were venerating the devil at this location, which obviously was not the case. It was for other purposes. They also have these uh, penises. There's stone carved penises that are associated to fertility rituals of the Muisca. And again, this is a site that is associated to agricultural practices and the timing for agriculture that is very important for them. So the other important thing about the Muisca is the consumption of coca leaves. And coca leaves, as you know, it's kind of the base to produce cocaine, but it's not the same. It's a plant. It's and the consumption of the leaves give these populations certain aspects from the alkaloids they can use. For example, they use it for going to high elevations. If you chew a little bit of coca and you put a little bit of an alkaloid in there, it's going to make you a little bit more resistant to going into those high elevations. It's going to give you energy. It's going to reduce hunger. So it has a lot of benefits. And coca was, as you see, for example, for the Inca or now the Quechua or the Aymara communities, it is very important. It's very associated to ritual and connections to these other realms, to these other godly powers as well. And coca leaves grows in lower elevations. So the Muisca did not produce coca leaves. They traded the coca leaves for salt, for example, or for other materials. Over here, you have what we call apoporo, which is a container where you're going to put those leaves. You're usually going to use an alkaloid. In this case, they use, for example, crushed shells from snails and other species of gastropods, and they put it in there. They put a little bit of the coca leaves, they mash it, and they just like put it in their mouth and they chew on it. And societies today in Colombia, indigenous groups in Colombia, continue to use this practice as well. So the next location that we're going to talk about, and this one is going to be a little bit harder to reach, is going to be Tierra Adentro. And Tierra Adentro is one of those other chiefdom societies that inhabited the Andean region, but we're looking here at the Western Cordillera here. So this is where Tierra Adentro is at this point here. And again, this is going to be a location that is going to be harder for tourists to go to. Nevertheless, given that it's so important and the sites are so incredible, a lot of the people continue to go there, even though, again, this is in an area that is still has pressures from violent, from the violent agents, including armed organizations related to drug trafficking and transportation and commerce of cocaine. So this is just an amazing location. If you can go to, I definitely suggest that you do it because it's just like nothing else in the world. And what happened here is that these populations, they constructed mounds, but they also have a lot of salt. They produce salt and they trade it with other indigenous groups in their surroundings. But the main attraction here is that they basically carved into the bedrock, into the ground stone, these incredible burials. And the burials, again, as you can see here, they were replicas of their long houses. So the long house where they live was basically recreated underneath the ground for their death. So it was a transition from the living into moving basically to a different house after your death. But as you can see, the representations are very amazing. You have these geometric shapes all over the construction. And you in the columns, you have representations of their gods or their deities or their ancestors that are watching over those individuals that have passed into this kind of other realm or what they consider another realm. The bodies were placed usually in these niches, as you can see here in those locations. And in contrast to, for example, the Muisca or other chiefly societies, you don't see a separation of elite burials versus non-elite burials. Everybody was kind of the same, but it was based on your kinship. So if you were part of that house group, you will be buried, regardless of your social status, you will be buried in that specific house. And there are multiples. There are over 50 of them in there, and they're just amazing. They still have not completely finished excavating some of this because the area is very remote. And then again, there's all these other pressures that do not allow research to be prominent in this area. Nevertheless, it's a very important archaeological site. The next one that I want to talk to you about is called San Agustin. And San Agustin is probably the most known archaeological site in the country. You have this location here also in the Andes, and this is where a lot of the rivers are formed. So, for example, the Magdalena River, which is this long river here that traverses the country, it's a navigable river. Kind of originates in this area of San Agustin. So it's a very important location. There's a lot of water. There's a water cult associated to these societies. These are in the department. We call departments basically what we call states here in the United States. So this is the department of El Huila. And it's as remote as Tierra Adentro, but there's more infrastructure. There's road systems, there's more safety, there's a military base there. So in terms of traveling to this location, it's much easier and much safer than going, for example, to the location that I showed you before in Tierra Adentro. So again, San Agustin's are located in this well-watered environment. You have elevation, but you also have valleys that they establish, and they utilize incredible irrigation systems to produce their crops. They have high populations in there, and they have trading networks throughout the country. So San Agustin has materials that come from all the way to the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, the Amazon. So again, it's a migratory route where people are passing by and bringing some of their cultural traditions, some of their technologies here. So San Agustin is mostly known for their incredible carved stones. As you can see, these things are very big, very tall monuments. And some of them are representing gods, like some of these individuals. Some of them are representing warriors or elite individuals, like this warrior here. Some of them are representing natural aspects, like for example, this is they call it the eagle, which is this eagle with a snake in the mouth, which it's very similar to what you see, for example, with the Aztec origin story, that you have this eagle kind of going into the cactus and eating the snake, and that's the location that they selected to construct their city. This is a similar representation of that that type of interaction. So again, also in addition to animals, you also have the representations of plants in this location, and it's also the only place in Colombia with elaborate tombs that have sarcophagi. So they have this incredible stone sarcophagi where they buried their elite um, individuals, their chiefs, made out of stone. So in the past, most of these statues were painted, as you can see in this bottom one, that it continues to have color. They were painting the statues. The majority of them have lost the pigmentation at this point because of erosion. It's a very rainy environment, a lot of precipitation there. So that rain is causing to some of these statues to lose their color. But there's also a lot of representations of what we call the transformation of their shamans. So there's a tradition in South America that shamans will consume hallucinogenic drugs and believe that they could transform into other beings, including particularly felines, the jaguar, for example. So there's like this kind of transformation of the shaman into a jaguar that they could actually go to these other realms, cause harm to other people, or help other individuals that needed help. And this is very associated to the representations in San Agustin. As you can see, the majority of these statues are going to have feline mouths. They're going to have these fangs, kind of these more feline characteristics of their face than a human would have. And again, this is representing that transformation into this feline, into these jaguars, associated with the consumption of hallucinogenics. And this individual is believed to have kind of this pouch that contains hallucinogenics that he's consuming to transform into this other being. The other thing that we find here, compared to, for example, with Terra Adentro, that we don't see that social inequality is represented in the burials. In San Agustin, it's very much there. So you have elite individuals that are buried in this very elaborate construction, these very elaborate tombs with an incredible amount of offerings. You have gold, you have bones, you have other species being included in those burial assemblages, versus individuals that are non-elite, that are just buried in common graves or in shallow graves without any offerings at all. So we see also a competition between chiefs of having the best, the best burial, the best representation of those deities, an incredible amount of status that they can compete against each other, and the person that is more prominent is going to be the main chief of that society. But at this point, leadership is just institutionalized. The other things that we see here is that the statues are also representing common practices, common activities, common events that are happening to these people. This one is one of my favorite ones. It's called the partero, which means a meat husband. It's not a midwife, but a meat husband is a male that is kind of getting this child out of with the woman. She's giving birth, and he is assisting in the birth of that child. So you have kind of these representations of very common practices. You also have representations of their tool technology that they use. This individual is known as the agriculture god, the god of agriculture, and he has kind of these plows that he's using to kind of use for agricultural purposes. We also have a lot of representations of warriors. This is a warrior individual. He's wearing a skull necklace, as you can see, a necklace with the skull. Again, that representation of those fangs associated to the felines. And he has these two bodyguards with him. Again, this is a tomb, and that individual was buried, that's represented here, was buried in that tomb. And these individuals that are kind of like his soldiers or his bodyguards are themselves protected by what we call the nahuatls. And that's a term that originates in Mexico, but basically it's a deity, a god that is protecting you, that it's always kind of navigating on top of you. It's always kind of in your area, and it's giving you this extra amount of protection. And those are represented here on top of these warriors that were likely also sacrificed when the chief died too for this particular species site. So one of the most important constructions of the San Agustin people is the Laguna de Lavapatas. And the Laguna de Lavapatas, I went there when I was very young the first time. My mom took me there when I was about 8 to 9 years. And for me, that was one of the big things that made me wanted to be an archaeologist. For me, that was just amazing. Basically, what they did is that they carved the bedrock, as you can see in here, into this kind of snake form, some geometric shapes, and basically they were baths for the elite. So the chief will go there and take baths and consume substances to kind of connect with other with their deities, with their gods, and it was a representation of power. If you were able to get into that specific bath, then that means that you were part of the elite. You were not a commoner. You were kind of something different. Uh, Unfortunately, this was exposed to the elements for too many years, and a lot of the carvings were eroded by the rain as well as the water that goes through it. And just recently, they put a roof, as you can see here in this image, they put a roof on top of it to protect it. I wish they had done that decade before they did, but now the location is considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That is very important and very well taken care of because, again, there was some looting happening there. There was the deterioration of the statues. And now it's one of the most important destinations for archaeological tourism in the country. And as I mentioned before, it's the most renowned archaeological site in Colombia. So the last group of, or the last chiefdoms and archaeological sites that I'm going to talk to you about today are the Tayrona of the Sierra Nevada. And remember, the Sierra Nevada is kind of this independent system here that reaches to about 5,700 meters in elevation. Again, it has environments from the sea level all the way to snow-capped mountain. Right now, it's occupied by the descendants of the Tayrona, the people that constructed these cities, who are the Kogi, which are shown here in this image, who are now taking care of their cultural resources. They are protecting them. And in many cases, they are restricting access to some of these sites. This picture here, for example, I took it's called Pueblito, which is about, it's in the mid elevation, but as you can see, they have incredible architecture, limestones, road systems that reach far and wide these locations. And one of the interesting things that we notice is that the Kogi are indeed the descendants of the Tayrona. They continue to use very similar practices, very similar rituals, very similar artifacts that their ancestors did in the past. And that matches the ethnographic research as well as the archaeological patterns that we see in this area. So the Tayrona also created this incredible agricultural system based on terraces. As I mentioned, these are elevations. So you have very, very prominent slopes there. And basically they carved into those slopes to create terraces for their agriculture. So you can have maize, you can have yuca or cassava, you can have fruits, you can have multiple products at the different elevation levels. But again, based on this system of terraces. And the terraces were also used in the construction of houses, of their longhouses or the ritual houses. This is what we call Ciudad Perdida, Lost City. As I mentioned before, that location, it's a little bit harder to get. There's tourism that goes to that area, but you really have to hike about 4 days carrying, your own food, your own water, to get to this location. But still, a lot of people continue to do it because it's such an impressive archaeological site. So, as you can see, kind of in this location, this used to have houses on top of it, or ceremonial centers, and there were circular houses. But in contrast to the Muisca, the Tairona had a decentralized political organization, and they focused more in commerce and in ritual practices than just those elite groups compared to the Muisca that are also Chibcha speakers. They, for example, did not have salt. So they traded salt with the Muisca for products they had. So, for example, coca, the coca leaves, or, for example, fish, marine fish. They could change shells, marine shells, anything that they could have in those coastal environments. They traded with the Andes. And as you can see here, they also produce these incredible road systems that are some of the most advanced road systems in the Americas prior to the conquest, and even after the conquest for that matter. They're just incredible. They reach kilometers and kilometers, 500 kilometers away, and they are basically cobble paved or stone paved systems of trade networks that they use for the production and their subsistence. You also have, as other Chibcha groups, and Chibcha speakers are well known for having incredible metallurgy. There were just some of the best goldsmiths in the world. Even by today's standards, we still don't know how some of these artifacts are being made or manufactured, or the goldsmithing is just fantastic. They also have alloys that they use. They are some of the first societies to use platinum, for example. You see in some of these chiefdom societies here. This is basically representing a shaman. They also wear masks. Right now, for example, Colombia and the Kogi are asking the Museum of Berlin to return some of these artifacts they have, because very early on, Prowse went there and he took a bunch of their artifacts and their ritual mask and took them back to the museum in Berlin. So now the Colombian government, in association with the indigenous groups, are requesting the repatriation of some of these important artifacts, including wooden masks that kind of are visible here. So a lot of the interpretations that we make from the archaeology are based on these iconographic representations in the artifacts too. The other thing that's important about the Kogi and the Tairona is they are not really elite groups or organizations based on a chief, but the person that's going to have authority there are going to be the head priest. They call it the mamo, or the father of the specific group, and it's based of power in religion, more cosmological associations, esoteric power, than just, for example, power in terms of warfare or military power, or associated to the storage and redistribution of food. They are more esoteric. They are more associated to the ritual aspect of their lives. So they're basically a theocratic society which emphasizes the laws. And the Chibcha are matrilineal societies. So basically, you trace your lineage through the female line instead of the male line. So it's the female line that is going to have the power. So if you are born into a family line or a kinship that is powerful, is because that female has power. The husband doesn't have too much to say in those aspects. And the other type of kinship they have is called avuncular descent, which basically is the uncle, the maternal uncle, that is going to give you your property. You'll inherit, your status. You inherit your material goods, your property, from your uncle, the brother of your mother, and not your father. And one of the reasons for that is that, some of these societies have, open sexual relationships with other individuals. So you don't really know sometimes who the father was, but you definitely know that your mother is your mother, and your mother's brother is still in your bloodline. So in a way, it was a way to protect that ancestry, that descent on this type of practices. You also have a lot of temples associated with this, and there's a lot of competition between different chiefdoms within the Tairona as well. So that's all that I have in terms of the description of these chiefdom societies, some of these important sites that you can actually visit and that I have visited myself in a wide range of time. But I want to leave you with this link here, which is a BBC documentary. You can find it in YouTube, and it just gives you more information if you're interested in this topic about the chiefdom societies that inhabited Colombia. It's a documentary made by the BBC and narrated by Jago, which is one of our colleagues that is a very popular archaeologist. And it's just a great way for you to continue to learn a little bit more about these pre-Columbian societies and some of these important sites that hopefully you get a chance to visit in the near future.
Thank you, Jorge. That's very interesting.
No problem.
We appreciate you sharing all your expertise with us.
No problem. My pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned a little bit about Colombia. And remember, Colombia is not spelled Columbia with a U. It has two O's. So it's Colombia with two O's. A lot of people spell it like Columbia University, but it's with double O's instead of the U.
Does anyone have any questions? All right, can you see the message in the chat?
Yes. Thank you, Allison, for listening and your attention. But let me see if there are any other questions in here. Oh, I see a couple of questions here. Allison is asking, how did San Jacinto become buried 5 to 8 meters on the ground? That's a great question. So San Jacinto is located in this flooding plain. So you have incursions of water and the river that come into this plain. So every time you have a water incursion, you have sedimentation that builds in. And remember, this is a 6,000-year-old site. So during those 6,000 years, sediments begin to build up and up and up into those previous plains, creating kind of this huge stratigraphic system there. And that's the reason that some of these sites are never found, because they're buried so deep that a lot of them are still unknown, and they're still discovering sites. I was working prior to coming here to Vermont. I was working in Mississippi, and in the banks of the Mississippi River, you see a lot of sites like this that are buried into this kind of very, very, very deep kind of sedimentary environments. And again, it's just that buildup from the fluvial systems that begins to create kind of that sedimentation in those specific sites. So actually, the discovery of San Jacinto was a very lucky break. What happened was that the bank of the river became eroded. The erosion kind of took off a big chunk of the bank, so the whole profile of that bank system became visible, and you could see ceramics included into those layers, those lower layers. So they knew exactly that they were very deep, and that's the reason they excavated into that area because they already knew there was going to be something at about 8 meters below the surface.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. My pleasure. I hope everybody enjoyed. And if you have any other questions or if you want to talk to me, you can find me at the website for the anthropology department at UVM. My email is there as well as my telephone number. So you can reach me at any point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative.
No problem. My pleasure.